Jai Gurudev. Today I would like to speak about war from the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita. There is nothing quite as divisive in society as war, as death, as the perception of injustice. And people struggle to make sense of it, to take a side, to understand how to position themselves in relation to that, to participate in it, to avoid it. And this is especially difficult for people who have a desire to be good, to harmonize, to unite, to love, to be kind. War exists in direct opposition to those intentions, to those feelings, and often it can be incredibly challenging to deal with it in a best way or in an ideal way. And I think it comes down to this fundamentally. Emotion clouds our judgment. Attachments cloud our judgment. They cloud our vision, they cloud our perception, our ability to see things, to discern between right and wrong. And on a spiritual level, we simply do not know who we are. Thinking that we are a body, thinking that we are mind, we create all sorts of attachments and bondages that are ultimately trivial to nation, to family, to land, to ethnic groups, to ideas, politics, power, money, all sorts of factors that ultimately lead us into behaviors and lead us into patterns of thinking that have nothing to do with the essence of who we truly are as souls, as fragments of the Lord himself, as Krishna states in chapter 15, verse 7 of the Bhagavad Gita. And it is in these two issues, in understanding spiritually the nature of the soul and who we are as distinct from this body, and on a material level, being able to step away from the emotional distortion, that the solution to this really lies. And the Bhagavad Gita is the perfect scripture to address this because it takes place on a battlefield. The Bhagavad Gita is a response to human questioning and lamentation on the topic of war. Arjuna is about to face war and questions, why do we do this? What is the point of it? How come we have arrived at this point and I don't wish to proceed for reasons XYZ? And he then speaks to Krishna about this, and God himself navigates the topic and guides him through those marshes into clarity. And that's the real objective of what I want to achieve today. And we're going to unpack this topic to achieve exactly that. Greater clarity, an ability to see things unaffected by emotional bias, by attachments, by misconceptions of the nature of the self, so that as much clarity as possible can be achieved, and consequently, and more importantly, that mental clarity will lead to clarity of thought, clarity of speech, and clarity of action. So when trying to unpack this, the first problem that we have is understanding the various levels at which wars operate in, or the levels of causality that lead to wars. Wars happen for a variety of reasons. They may happen for political reasons, for economic reasons, for ideological or religious reasons, social factors, historical grievances. There are many factors. And the problem with that is that often these causes or these factors are interwoven in such a complex manner that it becomes incredibly difficult to disentangle the various levels of causality of motivation, intention, etc. And so it is very common that somebody might disagree on a social level that, no, this person or this nation should not be waging war against these people or this nation for human reasons XYZ, but at the same time, on an ideological level, I actually disagree with this nation and agree with the opposite one. And these kind of conflicts create incoherences, confusions, and in many ways muddy the already unclear waters of war. People have a tendency to take sides. It is our nature. We want to understand who's right and who's wrong and take the right side. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of history. But this is an entirely complex matter. Who decides who's right and wrong? How do we come to that decision? What is our guiding principle and filter? We as human beings can only ever have a limited perspective on what's going on. And even if we were to be experts or researchers in the subject and we would really understand on a human level, on a material level, all of the factors, historical facts, in intentions, etc., there would still be so much that you are not privy to. For example, people's personal intentions, their state of consciousness, the internal why of why they're acting in the way they do. Often people are not aware of their own reasons why they act. And so imagine being aware of everyone else's reasons as an external observer. And so these are sometimes the inevitable limitations to our understanding, to our knowledge of these situations. And so, as a first point, we have fragmented, partial visions of reality. That's an issue. Attachments that cause biases are a huge issue. We have attachments to nation, to tradition, to ethnicity, our reputation, our image, even to our own bodies. Because of our identification with the material body, we are infatuated with our bodies to the extent of having immense fear. Fear of death is routinely one of the top 2 fears that human beings experience. Of course, the Bhagavad Gita says that this is ultimately an illusion, ultimately a false fear. We are not these bodies, we are spirit and souls. But the fact remains is for most people, they are materially conditioned, materially identified. And so due to these extreme attachments that we have to our image, reputation, bodies, and all the identities that stem from that, when we see others going through war and death happens, suffering happens, pain, an attack on these identities that we are personally attached to, we become personally identified with what's happening. And therefore, our vision, once again, becomes heavily fragmented and heavily distorted as a result of our attachments, our biases that take us in a particular direction due to the correlations, due to the identifications. And it prevents us from being able to see the truth, from being able to see things rationally, neutrally. The last factor that truly distorts that is emotion. Emotion that arises as a result of these attachments, that arises as a result of these biases that we have. But emotional imagery is often used in war to create exactly that. For example, how typical is it to use the imagery and stories of children dying in war? And why do you think that is? Because it elicits an incredibly strong emotional reaction in people. We don't want to see children suffering. We don't want to see children dying. Nobody does. But rationally, the truth of the matter is, does a child's life have more inherent meaning than the life of an adult? Is our assessment of justice or injustice ever truly complete, accurate? Do we see the full picture, the full causal chain? Do we just dismiss karma? So many people that believe in karma in their day-to-day life, they say, oh yes, I'm very spiritual, karma this, karma that. But the problem is how quick they are to abandon karma when it comes to these emotionally impactful events of life. On the one side, we accept that actions have a reaction. Karma governs life. On the other side, the minute we see apparent injustice, and here's the real problem, our ignorance doesn't permit us to see things for what they truly are. We immediately call it out. We immediately become emotionally compromised. And we abandon that which we previously held to be our belief, that which we previously held to be rational, which is that karma governs everything. Every effect has an original cause. Every cause will have an effect. We have to understand these fundamental truths about life, to understand things from a more complete mindset, from a more complete vision, and not allow the inevitable reactions that we will have based on our attachments to the various events that inevitably happen throughout war to reach distorted, compromised, clouded conclusions that force us into abandoning our values and beliefs. When we do that, we become prisoners of our impulses, prisoners of our emotions, our attachments, and our desires. And that, in my opinion, is the greatest recipe for a perpetuation of ignorance, of division, and ultimately of suffering. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 6, Krishna says the following: "The mind is a friend to one who has mastered it, but for one whose mind is uncontrolled, it becomes the worst of enemies." The call or need, I would say, the existential need to control our minds, to be conscious and aware of everything that we choose to think, feel, do, is fundamentally at the core of all of this. You and I, when we both think to ourselves, how do I view war, death, injustice, conflict? One of the first things that should come to our mind is, well, let me at least be in control of this great agent of action. Let me not allow my mind to be stolen away or to be manipulated or directed towards conclusions, emotions, actions, thoughts, speech that is going to cause exactly the opposite of what I stand for. We, as attempting to be good human beings, stand for love. We stand for harmony. We stand for that which is good. And yet, as I said, the attachments, the emotional responses that we have to the various stories and imagery associated with war, to the idea of war itself, as I said, it often causes all of that which we stand for to be replaced by this irrationality. And that needs to be addressed fundamentally. And so a huge issue that we all face and we have to be aware of, not that I offer necessarily the solution, but awareness is the beginning of a solution, is that every war happens on two fundamental levels. On the physical level, but then also on the mental level. And the mental war is a war of information. How are you allowing your perception to be formed by, and I don't like the expression, but misinformation? And the problem we have today is we can't really trust any source. We saw in the beginning of wars that have happened in recent years, so much distortion on social media. Images, videos, all sorts of things alleging certain things to have happened only to then be proven that they were distorted, manipulated, out of context, etc., etc. By then, a lot of people had formed their opinions. A lot of people had reacted, not only verbally, not only on social media and on the internet, in real life, with violence. And this is a problem. And it has always been a problem. It is not something new. It is not something created by social media. If you see historically, most wars and most participants of wars, veterans of wars, were under the impression that as they were fighting, they were doing what was right and what was good, and that they were on the right side of history. And when they come out of that and they see, let's say, the factors leading to it, the real, let's say, reality on the ground, they often come back with a very different opinion of things. They'll come back and say, I was misled. I thought it was one way and actually it's another. Information and the lack of it. Ignorance has always been a problem. It continues to be a problem right now. Knowing that, then, surely the first step that you can take is to be a little more neutral, a little more skeptical, a little more investigative, and not to take things at a sensational face value, understanding the propaganda machines that are always at play by people who want you to feel and think what they want you to feel and think to promote their own personal agendas. And so in saying all of this, pointing out all of this, what is the spiritual lens to look at this? What is the instruction of the Bhagavad Gita? What is our compass? And for me, that is ultimately Dharma. Krishna says in chapter 4, verse 8 of the Bhagavad Gita, for the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and to establish Dharma, I incarnate myself from age to age. So what is Dharma? Dharma is often translated as righteousness or duty, but it can also mean purpose. Krishna incarnates, God incarnates on earth to establish Dharma, to establish the true purpose of things, to establish righteousness. If you understand in the Vedic literature the various pillars of Dharma that are expounded and proposed at different moments, you will understand that we come to a collection of about 12 pillars of Dharma. And amongst them, we have the pillar of Ahimsa. Ahimsa essentially states that one should live life engaging in the minimum amount of violence possible. That means both in thought and speech, as well as action. And if we really live this Ahimsa principle, the thing is that it doesn't exclude violence. It doesn't say that you cannot engage in violence. So someone like Gandhi, for example, who's very famous for being a proponent of Ahimsa, many believe that he misunderstood the concept, that he took non-violence to its extremities. But rather the principle should be that one conducts the least amount necessary. Necessary for what? Simply put, to protect that which is of greatest value. To protect life itself. And so you can engage in violence in order to protect the system that does not permit violence. You engage in violence to protect lives which ought to be protected, because if we do not protect life, then what is of value in this world? And so these are the fundamental principles. And so one way you could look at it is to say that we are essentially intolerant towards intolerance. It may seem paradoxical at first, but it's the most sensible position one could possibly take. Now, anybody could look at me and say, well, Dharma, that's just one more religious concept. The Hindus will agree, but others won't. But don't fall for this superficial understanding of it. The principles of Dharma that I've outlined to you are not sectarian. They're universally beneficial for all humans. They don't benefit a particular belief. There's no condition placed on these values. When I say human life is that which ought to be protected, I'm not saying Vaishnava human life or Hindu human life. Human life in general, but in conjunction with the protection of human life should be the protection of systems, ideologies, cultures that protect human life universally, not through sectarian lines. And that is what Dharma is. And this is the uniqueness and beauty of the Bhagavad Gita. It is proposing a system that has always been in place and always will be. It is Sanatana Dharma, the eternal purpose, eternal righteousness, eternal duty. This is putting universal human well-being at the forefront of what we do. And this is essentially called the call for Loka Sangraha. Loka Sangraha means that we act for the benefit of mankind, not for personal agendas, not for selfish, egoistic agendas. We act for the benefit of all. Krishna says this in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 3. In chapter 3, verse 20, he says, "Indeed, you should act bearing in mind the welfare of the world." In verse 25 of the same chapter, he says, "Arjuna, just as the ignorant act with attachment to their work, so should the wise act without any attachment, thinking only for the welfare of the world." This is Krishna's instruction. This is the true filter for action. Don't act out of attachment. Don't act out of these corrupting biases, even towards yourself. Act for the greatest amount of benefit to the greatest amount of people. Loka Sangraha, the benefit of all. And this is the principle of Dharma. To create systems of behavior, of thought, of action that create universal benefit. And this is, in a sense, the true lens of the Bhagavad Gita. Think of Arjuna's behavior in the first chapter. He says to Krishna in verses 38 and 39, "Even though these people, whose minds are overpowered by greed, see no evil in destroying their family and betraying their friends, why should we, O Krishna, who do recognize this evil, engage in such sinful deeds?" Arjuna is pointing out that in this impending battle at which the Bhagavad Gita is set, the Mahabharata between the Pandavas and Kauravas, they are families that are fighting each other, a sort of civil war, if you will. Arjuna is pointing out, they are evil. They are overpowered by greed. They clearly do not stand for moral values, for Dharma. But still, his conclusion is, just because they are like that, why should we join them in this? Why should we fight them? Why should we engage in the exact acts that we are condemning them for? They are being violent. They are going to kill. Why should we therefore respond by killing them? Aren't we committing the same mistake, the same sin? And therein lies the exact problem of good people. Good people, kind-hearted people, may very well see war situations exactly the way Arjuna does. But listen to what Arjuna specifically said. These people whose minds are overpowered by greed and see no evil in destroying families, friends, etc. If you do not resist this, if you do not show intolerance towards this intolerance, you are permitting this to become the predominant mentality, the predominant way of life. Because if you allow evil, greed, etc. to win, because you are married to goodness and to righteousness, you are actually a contributing factor to the demise of goodness, to the demise of righteousness. Therefore, Krishna says as a response to Arjuna in chapter 2, verse 11, "Whilst grieving for those who should not be grieved for, your words appear wise, but the learned lament neither for the dead nor for the living." Your words appear wise. Good people appear to be on the right side when they say, let's not engage in this. But it is exactly in doing that, exactly in not taking a position. Which position, might you ask? Take the position of Dharma. After everything I have said about Ahimsa, about Loka Sangraha, one may ask the question, which side passes those tests? Which nation in which war can truly be deemed to be acting for purely dharmic reasons? The truth is, often none. That's the truth. Often none. Often in war, both sides are equally culpable for different reasons. So which side should you take? Take the side of Dharma. Take the side of protecting life and of protecting the systems that know how to value life universally. Therefore, take the side of Dharma the way God has taken the side of Dharma. Krishna says that he comes here to uphold Dharma, to protect Dharma, to establish Dharma. Therefore, as eternal servants of God, as people striving to act in the way God acts, out of love, out of knowledge, then we take the side of Dharma. Your job is to apply the various filters of Ahimsa, of Dharma, of Loka Sangraha, doing away with attachments and emotional biases, things that corrupt our vision, with the recognition of the informational propaganda wars that happen. We must try to decide for ourselves, where is Dharma? And how can I support Dharma and the propagation of Dharma in these conflicts and in these situations? Krishna says as much in the Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 3, verse 21, Krishna says, whatever an eminent person does, other people also do. Whatever standard that one sets, the world follows. Now you may ask yourself, am I an eminent person? And the answer is yes. You will always be eminent to someone, to your family, to your friends. This is not a duty or responsibility reserved only for celebrities, famous people, politicians, and leaders. As Krishna says, eminent people set a standard that others will then follow. The world will follow. And so the true way to do this is to, in a sense, invest in your maximum alignment with these principles, your maximum clarity, your maximum transformation to create maximum impact in others. There's a beautiful image portrayed in chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita in which Arjuna, on his chariot, asks God, Krishna, his charioteer, to take him to the middle of the battlefield. We have the Pandavas and the Kauravas, the two warring nations. And although Arjuna is on the side of the Pandavas, he says to Krishna, please bring me to the middle of these two warring factions. Why? Because he wishes to look left and right and see them from a position of neutrality. Take away your personal biases, take away your fragmented vision, and try to get the complete vision. Try to see things as best you can from a neutral perspective, a rational perspective, an uncompromised perspective. And that initial neutrality should then transform into a very specific stance. I am not advocating for eternal neutrality. I'm advocating for the defense, the support, and the propagation of Dharma. Jai Gurudev.